And something the good that came out of our Connecticut experience is something shifted in my spirit. There was a maturity that came. Something shifted in that nothing throws me anymore. Any dysfunction that comes up or people who are dysfunctional, I was able to self-differentiate. And it was one of those refining experiences that helped me be a better pastor today.
I wondered about that because you have a church now that has several different cultures that perhaps from time to time clash with each other without people really realizing what's happening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially the bigger our Hispanic church gets, the more things we run into. And the church is actually pretty healthy. I'm also a marriage educator for the Gottman Institute. And so the first thing I did when we came to this congregation is teach a marriage class in which everyone in the congregation came.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we true the verse of Genesis 3:16, and we discover that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way.
I heard the voice of the Lord distinct. It was a distinct moment. And I heard the Lord say, "Faith, feed my sheep." And I realized that I wasn't done yet and that I was to keep going. And so I went back to my town in Buffalo and I started a house church. And I did that. We did that for 5 years, my husband and I. So that was a fun experience too. It was very healing. And something the good that came out of our Connecticut experience is something shifted in my spirit. There was a maturity that came. Something shifted in that nothing throws me anymore. Any dysfunction that comes up or people who are dysfunctional, I was able to self-differentiate. And it was one of those refining experiences that helped me be a better pastor today.
I wondered about that because you have a church now that has several different cultures that perhaps from time to time clash with each other without people really realizing what's happening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially the bigger our Hispanic church gets, the more things we run into. And the church is actually pretty healthy. I'm also a marriage educator for the Gottman Institute. And so the first thing I did when we came to this congregation is teach a marriage class in which everyone in the congregation came. It was really funny. But what it did for us is it gave us words and tools and conflict strategies and ways to talk about issues that come up. And it really created kind of a solid base for dealing with conflict. And so I considered that just really valuable. And the church is actually pretty healthy. The people are not thrown by conflict. And we've had some new things come up, especially recently, because we're sharing building, we're sharing space, we have boundary issues because the pastors of our little Hispanic church are not licensed yet. So we're negotiating boundaries. Whose job is this and whose job is that? And so it can be kind of amusing at times, but like I said, not much throws me. My Connecticut experience helped me to develop a really strong core and a really strong non-anxious presence.
Mm-hmm. So you are quite a researcher too. Can you tell us the story? I remember you made a reference one time to going back to Crown Library.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, I'll tell you that story. So when I was at Crown College, my husband and I were also going through some challenges in our marriage. And one of the things that kept coming up was Ephesians chapter 5. And every time I would start reading Ephesians at the beginning, and I get to chapter 5 in the verses 21 to 28 or whatever, or to 30 some. And then I would start to cry. And then I'd go back and I'd start over. And I'd start at the beginning again and read, and I'd get to chapter 5 and I'd cry. And then a third time it happened. I started over and I get to chapter 5 and I started to cry. And finally I said, God, what is this about? Why is this painful for me? And again, it was one of those times when I distinctly heard the voice of the Lord, and I heard the Lord say, Faith, study more. And so I went to Crown College. I checked out every commentary on Ephesians that I could find, and I brought them home and started reading. And for the first time in my Christian life, I saw that there were a whole variety of viewpoints on the text, and that some I'd read the commentary and like, oh, this is horrible, and I even start to cry.
Yeah.
One of them said that that this whole oneness in Christ meant that I would become my husband. I would adopt his perspectives, and I would unite myself with him in such a way that I no longer had viewpoints of my own and feelings of my own. And I just read that text and I just wept. I'm like, how could this happen? And I think I was in that process too of developing a self. I think sometimes in the submission world where women are called to be subordinate, they lose their identity and they lose their sense of self. And that was what was happening to me. And then I found other commentaries that were much more enlightening and much more open-minded, and showed how we were supposed to submit to one another, and it was it was much more focused on mutuality. And so that was kind of an interesting experience, and it kind of catapulted me into the development of my own inner sense of who I was. I started working with a therapist and really began to work on my identity. Who am I? Because I had thought that even my husband had the power to define whether or not my feelings were appropriate, and so I really grew during that time. In fact, one of my professors said, "You came in under a cloud of darkness, and you have left a lighthearted person," and so they could see the change in my face. So that was a very formative experience.
Wow. Wow. So here at the True 316 Foundation, we pay primary attention to what happened in the Garden of Eden.
Mhm.
And we discover through my wife, Dr. Joy Fleming, through her research, that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or
Yeah.
limit woman in any way. But when you look at the New Testament passages and you have the incorrect view that God did somehow bring the hammer down on Eve and all her daughters in more than one, at least one or multiple ways, then you get to Ephesians, and then somehow the passage comes out real negative and real hard to work with. So what we ended up doing here is we ended up with a 4-book series. We call it the Eden book series. Book 1 is called the Book of Eden. You know these. Book 2 is called Beyond Eden, on Ephesians 5 and 6. So our heart is definitely into opening up these passages. Open up. They're wonderful, aren't they? They're just great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, I realized that I had read Joy's book a number of years back, and I didn't even know it. And I went and looked at, like, oh yeah, that's the book I read. And so
Yeah.
I read the one about Eden, and because I had questions too about childbirth and pain in childbirth, and so I had a lot of questions about the Bible and God's view of women, because I think I had internalized sort of a sense of inferiority because of the way that those scriptures were taught in my life experience.
I had a person from the United Kingdom challenge me, a friendly challenge, but just yesterday I got an email saying, well, I'm not convinced that your interpretation of 1 Timothy 2 is right. And I thought, he wasn't interacting with something that I want to point out to him. So when Joy did the analysis of Genesis 2 and 3, she drew it as a bell curve. She said there's this big overall literary pattern, and then there are these 2 linchpins, and then there are these other links and passages. And what I had, talking about Ephesians, we'd found that Paul used the same bell curve in Ephesians 5:15 to 6:9. He knew exactly what had been done in Genesis. And then when he got to 1 Timothy, he used the same bell curve over again. And I had a conversation with several of our foundation members afterwards, and they said, well, Bruce, remind him that the meaning is not just in the word definitions, but the meaning is also conveyed through the word patterns.
Yep.
And so I'm going to have to write back to him and say, you're not taking the word patterns into account here, because it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. You know, and the literalist interpretation methods that are common, they don't always take into account the literary features and all of those patterns that you speak about. And, you know, it almost feel like they're taking the scripture less literally because they're not paying attention to all of the beautiful features that were common in the Hebrew literary field.
I would prefer even to call such reading a surfacist reading, because
Right.
if you go, let's say you go to a new area in an ancient land, like let's say Turkey, and you survey what's there, you haven't actually done an archaeological dig. You may have picked up a couple of artifacts, but they have no provenance. So you don't really know what they mean. You suspect they might mean this or that, but they could be copies. You don't know. They could be younger or older. They could not be what they look like.
Mhm.
And so to do a surface survey only gives you a hint of what lies below. And any archaeologist will tell you that. And I think to be a surfacist reader of the Bible means that you actually don't know what it says.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent analogy.
There's a
Yeah.
verse in it. When I was just growing up as a young Christian, I came across a verse in the Psalms and I liked it. In the English version, it said, "The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire." And being a Fleming, I noticed those F's, and I flashes forth flames of fire. It was great, 4 F's in a row. But of course, in the Hebrew, it didn't say that. But what they were trying to do was to give you a sense of the sounds and the catchy ways that it was written. And so Genesis 2 and 3 has got sounds and catchy ways that it's written in Ephesians and 1 Timothy.
Mhm.
So let's just zero in here. We like to ask the question, what's your true 316 story? And you've already started. You somehow came across Joy's book.
Yeah, yeah, I did come across her book, and I think it was before I even met you, Bruce. Um, you know, and after my journey in Crown College, I got acquainted with Christians for Biblical Equality, and that kind of led me place. The internet was just kind of coming out, and I just started searching, and I came across Joy's book and read it. And actually, the book answered a lot of questions I had about childbirth, and it actually tagged back to a book I had read when I was in my first time pregnancy. I think Helen Wessel was the author. And I read her book, I think it was The Joy of Natural Childbirth, in which she covered some of those same areas that Joy did. And so I remembered those things that I had forgotten. And Joy's book was really good in helping me to understand the curse and how God isn't cursing women with pain in childbirth, but that the ability to have many conceptions could be a blessing. And that sometimes because of the fall, we have difficulties in our relationships and difficulties even with our children. It's sorrowful, as she said in her book, that we have sorrow because of how human beings made their choices.
Yeah. So that book, of course, is Man and Woman in Biblical Unity, Theology from Genesis 2 to 3 by Joy Fleming.
Yeah, that's the one I read. Yep.
Yeah. I think that was the first or one of the 2 first books that they ever were able to help spread. And that's how the word got out. We're just right at the point of releasing that in a French translation.
Oh.
So yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Do you have some of your books in Spanish?
No. Should we?
Yes. What I encounter in my ministry is that a lot of the complementarian books are in Spanish. And so when they're looking for marriage books and when they're looking for how to help couples, they refer to these complementarian books. And I have encountered, I'll just tell you a quick story. It wasn't a woman from our church, but it was a woman I met in St. Cloud, and she was currently at the homeless shelter. And she came to our food shelf, and I prayed with her, and she shared her story with me. And her husband had sold the trailer house out from under her, and she had no place to live. She didn't have documents. She didn't have a work permit. And she looked at me and she said, the Lord has mandated that I suffer because that is my role. Because and she went on to explain, you know, the role of woman as her church was teaching it. And I was just horrified and shocked at what I was hearing from her. And, you know, and I've heard some of these other stories from English-speaking women too, that have been in complementarian circles. And I think it's getting worse. I think some of the teaching is getting more and more dysfunctional. And some of these poor women are experiencing massive levels of abuse, and they think it's the Lord's will. And my heart just breaks over that. So there's a desperate need for egalitarian books in Spanish. And I know Christians for Biblical Equality has some articles in Spanish that I have shared widely, but we need to get some healthy books in Spanish.
There's a professor
There.
in a Bible school in Spain who contacted us not too long ago, and he said that he had a translation of one of his books in Spanish. And I said, "Oh, how did you translate it? Did you?" Because he could write it there. He said, "No, actually, I had a translator do that." He says, "Would you like to have him translate anything for you?" So
Yeah.
maybe we should follow up on him, huh? You think we ought to do that?
Oh, yes. Yes. And I do run into it again and again. And our particular ministry leaders for our Hispanic church they have read, I think the one book that's out there in Spanish is the one 10 Lies the Church Tells Women. That's the only one I can find, but they are open to women in ministry and trying to learn as much as they can about healthy marriages. So, but again, there's the resources out there are pretty limited.
We got, this is the first time, public announcement, here we go, first time on the Eden podcast. We just made available a new booklet that we've done. So we've got Joy's 407-page dissertation that people can get, or we've got her book. We also have the Book of Eden, but those are more than 100 pages. Well, now we have an 8-page booklet called the 4 Eden Insights. And if you go to true316.com/shop, you can find those things there. And the Eden Insights booklet costs $3.16. Thought that was a good price, but it's on sale for free right now.
Okay.
But I'm thinking maybe that's where we ought to start. Maybe we ought to see if we can get that translated into Spanish.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Christians for Biblical Equality has a couple of books on abuse in Spanish that I found. And then Marge, the Australian woman, has articles in Spanish. But I would love it if any of your books could be translated into Spanish, and maybe we could do some fundraising around that, huh?
Go to donor box, true316.com. What is it? I can't get it out. True316.com/ donate. I guess it's donate/.com/donate. Yeah. And you can put a note there if anybody wants to give to that.
Yeah.
That'll help because we can't do it for free.
No, I hear you. And yeah, I think it's really needed in the Spanish speaking community. It would make a big difference for many, many men and women.
Yeah. And we care. We're now heard in 127 countries worldwide. So
fantastic.
We have listeners out there. Yeah.
And it sounds like, Bruce and Faith, I'm just guessing that if we were to get that booklet translated into Spanish, you might be willing to beta test it and see
Yep.
if your own congregants can understand it and talk about it.
Yep, we could. Yep. Yeah.
By the way,
do a Google Translate too. I mean, it's not perfect, but if you do Google Translate, and then you can have someone who is fluent in Spanish review it. And Google Translate is getting pretty good. So
it really is.
All my sermons go into Google Translate, and I translate them for our Hispanic community. So,
by the way, Joanne, I want to point out that Dan and Faith Totushek were one of our very first donors to the foundation. So there's been a big encouragement there. Joanne, you have a special question we were hoping you could ask her about.
Yes. Before we leave, it would be wonderful to hear about your recent award.
Yeah, I received the Denman Award for Evangelism, and I think it's largely because of our Hispanic community. My colleague Fabiola Rivera, who is one of our Hispanic ministry leaders, she also received it. And we have a large amount of newcomers. There's people who speak Spanish that have been here for many years. And then there are a large amount of newcomers coming to our city, and they have no community. They have no place to worship. There are a couple of Hispanic churches, but there's so many people coming, so many new immigrants. And we started a little Bible study with 6 people, and it has grown now to 40 people. And this little community is filling a huge need. They gather every Saturday night at 5, and they all bring food. Fabiola and Juan first started out cooking all the food themselves. And then it became a thing where everyone wanted to bring food. And so everyone brings food from their own country. We have Venezuelan food, we have Mexican, we have Guatemalan, Ecuadorian, Dominican Republic, and there's just a whole variety of ethnic foods that are brought every Saturday night. And so the funny story is that Juan and Fabiola wanted to just do it once a month because it's a lot of work to bring food, and the entire community voted them down and said, no, we love this. This is what we love. And so they come and they share food, they eat together, and then they gather for a Bible study. And once a month they have a worship service, and they call it Just Worship. And they worship the Lord together. We put together a band. My husband plays guitar in Spanish, so a little band. And so I know.
Yeah.
And so it's beginning. We're starting to equip people with, and teaching people how to do the sound system and how to do the live streaming. And so there's a lot of equipping going on. But it's just been a thing where we've been gathering a lot of newcomers to our country. And then it's benefited our Anglo church too, because we're becoming known in the community as a church that welcomes immigrants. And so we have people that are from Africa that come to our church, and a new family from Ethiopia with 5 little girls. And the mother is so sweet. She just wants her 5 little girls to know that they are beloved, and that they too can become mighty women of God. And so she's just started coming. And anyway, we've since Easter, we've had 6 new people that have come to stay. Actually 7 who've come to stay, plus the 5 little girls. And so we started a Sunday school. We had no children before, and we just started a little Sunday school. So all of this kind of falls under the evangelism rubric.
That's great.
It's almost like an Acts chapter 2 situation where you have people of all kinds of languages, but they're coming together.
Yeah.
Because of the words of the Lord.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. In fact, I did when I first arrived here in 2018, I did a sermon series on the book of Acts. And we talked a lot about how the people of God, it's not just our group, but it's a worldwide multi-ethnic community of Jesus followers. And that, when we see small when we only see our own group of people. And we've talked a little bit about baptism and how we're baptized into the same water. And when you have a baptism service with a multi-ethnic group of people, it changes how you think about the community of God. And you recognize that you share this space, you share this water of baptism. And also at the communion table, you recognize that Christ has invited everyone to the table. And we often do the communion liturgy in both English and Spanish. And it just changes how you understand the nature of Christ's welcome. And our church is really being formed in their heart. We have a little opposition now and then, but the heart of our congregation is really being formed to be a people who love people.
Gosh, I'd love to visit.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Faith. This is great. We say hi to Dan from us, and Joy says hi, and
Thank you. I will say hi to Dan.
from Joanne and David as well. because
Yeah.
David hails from sort of the same area you grew up in. So
Oh, how interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got his two uncles used to have an archery shop at St. Cloud, and he was born and raised in Clara City, Minnesota.
Oh, how about that? Yeah.
Mhm.
okay,
Fantastic.
well, we've been listening to Faith. Listening, we've been listening. We've been also talking, enjoying, following along with Faith Totushek, pastor, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Thanks so much, Faith.
All right. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah, thank you.
All for now. Bye.
True 316 Foundation is the home of the Eden podcast. Join us for $3.16 a month or more. Let's true the verses on the key passages on women and men. Go to true316.com/partner. True 316 is strengthening and encouraging many, and we're getting stories every day of lives changed through our ministry. We're the home of the Eden podcast, and we're getting the word out that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way. Our volunteer help is wonderful, and we grow stronger with each new true partner who gives to the True 316 Foundation so that we can cover the costs to do the technical work of the Eden podcast, to coordinate our True School workshops like the 2-week Eden workshop on Genesis 2 and 3, and to make the True 316 Foundation function in its outreach to scholars and students around the world. You can give now with a one-time gift. And better still, you can join now and become a monthly donor. We call our monthly donors our true partners. Please join now by going to true316.com/partner.